We had a chance to talk to Dick Dunkel. He's the father of MEDDICC, the sales qualification methodology. I learned so much from him sharing about the foundation of how that came to be, along with what that looks like today for not just on the sales leader side, but also the modern buyer side. Tim, I'm curious what your thoughts were.
Yeah, what I really appreciate about Dick is 30 years ago developing what I believe was a data-backed idea for qualification called MEDDICC. But he isn't going to, when you hear this, he isn't going to come across as just a theoretical person. He's a practitioner. So 30 years of continuing to execute as a sales leader, execute as a seller, execute as an enablement leader. So what you're going to hear are some very practical guidelines for how to improve your team's ability to create and convert pipeline.
Our guest today, Dick Dunkel, he is known as the father of MEDDICC. It's a sales qualification methodology used to help enterprise sales teams determine if a lead is a good fit for their sales funnel. And don't worry, if this is the first time that you're hearing MEDDICC, we're going to dive into that a little bit more with Dick here. But he's also a practicing revenue growth leader at Cloudera. So as his role as VP of Field Enablement, he leads teams to elevate sales execution and impact customer performance. And he's been in his career for quite some time now. So he's helped major Fortune 500 companies adapt to change and improve business process through innovative technology and process improvement. I'm really excited that you are here today to share with us a little bit more about, well, how do you become the father of MEDDICC, and how and why this is so important for leaders to get the sales methodology right in 2025. Dick, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. It's great to be with you guys. So I'll just give you maybe some very quick background. My sales career started in 1986 or so. So I'm dating myself, and I sold office equipment for a bunch of years for Xerox Corporation. And actually the first sales book that I ever read was called Spin Selling, and it's a classic and such a good, solid framework for understanding kind of a discovery process and understanding customers' needs. So after a successful career at Xerox, I also have a civil engineering degree, and so I thought I'd put those two things together and made my way to the world of CAD/CAM and design automation at Parametric Technology Corporation, PTC. I was a sales rep for PTC in Eastern Pennsylvania starting in 1994, and I had a very good run there, landed lots of new logos at companies that were sheet metal fabricators and discrete mechanical engineering design products. And after a couple of years there, I was invited to join the sales development program. Worked for a woman named Ann Gary. And so I joined that team. I moved my wife, my pregnant wife, and my 2-year-old son from Philadelphia up to Needham, Massachusetts, and began developing an intermediate sales training class. And so while I was there developing that class, began to really engage with our sales reps to really understand why we were winning and why we were losing and why were deals slipping. And so that was the exercise. That was really the origin of MEDDICC. The first version of MEDDICC was, this exercise of why do we win, why do we lose, and why do deals slip? And so through this process of really gathering that information and understanding, what was working, what was helping us, what was hurting us, eventually we would bucket the answers, and eventually that was how the acronym was formed. Now, I will say this, that kind of the basic elements of MEDDICC, metrics, economic buyer, decision criteria, decision process, the identification and implication of pain, champions, were not brand new concepts, right? Those concepts were all most of them were all being used at various degrees throughout PTC. So if I deserve credit for anything, it was sort of the packaging of putting it together into a package and an acronym that we then, were able to really adopt across the company. And so we did a very, with the support of our leadership at the time. John McMahon was the head of sales. Dick Harrison was the president of PTC at the time. And they were both very, very strong sales leaders. They really embraced MEDDICC, and my colleagues and I rolled it out globally. And sort of the rest of the story is that in 2000 and the early 2000s, many of those guys moved on to pursue early stage startups, venture-backed companies, and they all took MEDDICC with them. And that was sort of the beginning of the proliferation of MEDDICC. So that's the quick story. But lots and lots of people that really deserve the credit for the fundamental concepts and really driving it into the environment of highly innovative mostly technology companies, but companies that are disrupting the status quo. Environments where there's a complex decision process. This is really where MEDDICC and other versions of it, MEDDICC, have really flourished.
Well, I appreciate the Cliff Notes version. If I'm being completely transparent with you, because I really thought the acronym had to dig deeper into it. I thought also you put some credit to your own initials and put the DD in there just to make sure that you stamped it as father of MEDDICC.
Yes, Amanda, you found me out. That was my ulterior motive.
I just love this idea that it was born out of doing the research, clustering some things, and then packaging it and giving it an acronym. Because honestly, it's enough. You can't manage change against all, just these things floating around in the air. Like, to make it purposeful versus by accident, you need to package it and put an acronym on it. So it seemed practical at that point that if you were going to spread this across any organization, yours and others eventually,
that's right.
It has to be learnable, teachable, coachable.
Tim, I think you're really hitting on an important point here. And when we originally created, like literally the week after the acronym was coined, and I was running an intermediate sales training class, and we went through the exercise, and then I presented the answer to everybody. And I said, guys, this is the answer. MEDDICC is the answer. And there's a guy in the class and he raised his hand and he says, you mean to tell me that I is for pain? And I said, yes, you're right. I is for pain. He says, that's the worst acronym I've ever heard. And so we all had a good laugh about it. The same guy called me a week later or 2 weeks later. And he said, I have to tell you, I use it before and after every meeting. He said, I will never forget it. And by the way, I talked to that guy, a few months ago. We keep in touch, and so I think that's the point of it is that the simplicity of it, the clarity of it, the utility of it, right? It's the ability to use it to help set your meeting objectives, a way to identify gaps. That's how people have been using it, since 1996, and it's got legs. And obviously, there's a couple of variational, versions of it that have sparked up, which is fine. Like, the most important thing is that organizations make it their own, right? To me, I think that's the most important thing. And I've done consulting with companies that are like, okay, well, how do we adopt this? And the most important thing that you have to do when you adopt this is you have to make it your own. And you have to make it, really an integral part of the way that you evaluate your opportunities and set your strategy.
Dick, I really appreciate the context of how MEDDICC came to be. Can you expand a little bit more on the value of the foundational sales process and what that means in terms for companies and sales leaders?
Sure. Yeah. Obviously every company is different, right? And so I think it's important to make a distinction between sort of the two sides of the same coin. So, you have the process, like think of it in terms of kind of like the engagement process, right? These are the things that we're going to do with the customer. We're going to do a discovery workshop. We're going to do a solutioning workshop. We're going to do a proof of concept. Like those are the activities that we're going to navigate through. But then in parallel to that, right, you have to layer over top of that kind of the qualification and the things that we have to accomplish as a result of these activities, right? And so it's really the marriage of those two things that creates that, process, and that the marriage of process and methodology to make sure that you're spending your time wisely, that you're spending your time wisely, that you're spending the customer's time wisely, that you're spending your company's resources wisely. And this is really, that gets to the question that I think a lot of organizations struggle with is sort of, how do I qualify in and how do I qualify out, right? And so that's really what this gets at, is this idea that the reason that you have a process is because when you have a process, you're establishing stages, and those stages should have very clear success criteria, right? And the success criteria is defined by MEDDICC, right? So when you're able to blend those things together, it becomes very clear. What are the things that we have to accomplish during discovery? What are the things we have to accomplish during solutioning? And when you do that, when you are achieving those things, when you're achieving that, those outcomes, then that's the green light, and you should continue. And if you're not, then you should hit the pause button, and you can say something like, "Gee, Tim, it seems like this is not really a priority for you guys right now. Is this something that, would there be a better time for us to revisit this?" And Tim will say one of two things. He'll either say, "Yeah, the timing's not great, and unfortunately we are distracted," or Tim's going to say, "Don't go, right? We really want to move forward on this, and we're ready to really commit the resources to making sure that this process goes well." And so those are some of the, sometimes uncomfortable conversations that salespeople have to learn how to have so that they're spending their time and their resources wisely.
Well, Dick, I love that part because that's a hard call for anybody to make who's under pressure to build their pipeline. That it's just not in our nature we have happy ears, right? and we want to keep this thing on the books, thinking it's going to happen, and that's good. Optimism is a great skill or a great quality for a salesperson. But our audience here is a lot of them are sales leaders, frontline managers who manage these salespeople. So maybe I think it'd be good to talk a little bit about how, this helps a salesperson, but how does a manager leverage this as part of their day job and make their work more effective as well as efficient?
Yeah, it's such a great point. And, I think it's such a great opportunity to help every manager be a better coach, right? Managers want to be able to coach and develop their people. I think sometimes they're not really sure how to do that, or what specifically, what area do my people need help in? I give you a quick example, a quick illustration of this. We did a really cool exercise with a company, and we introduced their top 5 sales reps to come on stage, and they were well versed in MEDDICC, and they each talked about why they were successful. Why did they make President's Club? Why were they at 150 or 200% of plan? And each of them gave actually a different answer as to why they were successful. The first sales rep stood up and said, "I really attribute my success to my ability to develop strong champions." And the next guy stood up and said, "Well, the reason I really attribute my success was my ability to establish executive alignment." And, the top woman stood up and said, "I think we really did an awesome job of really educating and influencing the customer's decision criteria." So now you've got, top performers that actually are achieving great success with different results, right? Imagine putting all of that together or tapping into all of that as a way to help every single person elevate like the quality of their execution, right? As a manager, like what more could you ask for, right? Is to be able to have a coaching framework that helps everybody get better. And also to, be able to identify what does great look like. And so that's maybe another part of it. We can talk more about sort of this idea of MEDDICC scoring, right? Is because when you bring that objectivity to it, right? You're beginning to create very clear definitions of what does great look like. And so giving people a framework to sort of achieve that through the sales cycle.
Okay, now I got a picture of everybody on stage at that sales kickoff, each one kind of talking about their success and isolating it or identifying it to one of the letters in the acronym. Did you make them hold up cards like I'm M, I'm E? That's the picture I have right now.
It was
and
really
what
awesome.
does it spell? Yeah, and,
What was interesting about it was that there were people in the audience who had been not really as exposed to MEDDICC, or they were new to the company, and they were like, when you see the most respected salespeople in the organization attributing their success to these elements, right? It was like, okay, this is what winners do, and I want to be up there next year. And so it's really such a great way to because sometimes I think leaders sometimes have a tendency to be like, let's just leave our top performers alone. And I'm like, that's a huge mistake. I said, they are such an incredible source of credibility that for this initiative, that when you can get your top performers to say that, to align their success with the framework, it can really help to drive the adoption.
So, can I just throw a random ringer of a question in here for a second? Thinking if I put my I'm a first time sales leader hat on for a moment, and this is a methodology that I'm really first time using with my sales team, from your perspective, where would that leader find the really the biggest challenge in implementation?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great, I mean, I'm with you. So, I of course, the answer is that it depends, but I would say that many organizations, here's, I'll give you kind of an opinion here, which is that most sales organizations need help with the front end of the process, right? Like when in all of the years that I've done onboarding, like we've always really put the majority of our effort on the front end of the process. It's like, what's our ideal customer profile? How do you attack your territory? How do you generate interest? How do you engage in effective discovery? Right? Like if you can get your new people to really successfully execute on those things, then what ends up happening is that everybody in the organization now becomes interested in your opportunities because you've got well-qualified opportunities. You've got managers involved. You got your SEs involved. Now all of a sudden you're getting resources, and now it becomes on-the-job training, right?
Mm.
So to me, I always felt like it made a lot of sense to put your effort, the majority of your onboarding and getting started effort, into helping people to really build pipeline, right? If you can't build pipeline, you're not going to be successful. And so as a manager, helping salespeople to really understand how do I map MEDDICC to that initial qualification, right? How do I help my salespeople to do that? Because if I can help them to be successful at building pipeline, then they're on their way. And the majority of they can learn how to run a POC. They can learn how to negotiate our terms and conditions, right? Those things are things that are going to happen down the line. But I think, yeah, focusing on the front end of the process and making sure that salespeople are able to distinguish, going back to sort of the qualify in and out question, right? Making sure that they have a clear idea as to what does a good opportunity look like, and making sure that they're not wasting their time on, they're not wasting their time on the C's.
So what I really appreciate about this is we've covered some good ground on how having fundamental foundational process and methodology is important for a rep, and also for the manager to build and coach and manage that pipeline, which is job one. All the other things will come after you get some meaningful qualified pipeline. So that explains a lot to me why companies are so focused on it. Every time I talk to them, it's like, we got to do this first. And it's like, yeah, because nothing else happens unless we have pipeline. So that makes total sense. I want to bring the buyer into the equation, because what we're hearing anymore in modern day is that buyers believe they've done their own discovery. They've done their own personal qualification. They think they know what their problems are. They believe they know what the solutions are. And we're finding them, or they're finding us, in their minds later in this process. And I'm curious if the modern buyer, who thinks they're way down the path, they have what we call an escalation of commitment, is willing to be part of a discovery and qualification process that feels like it's kind of backing them up to the beginning. How do you account for that in the world we're living in today?
If I could maybe add a third dimension to this discussion. We've talked about sales process, or kind of the activities that you go through with the sales stages. We talked about qualification, MEDDICC as a framework to make sure that you're progressing. The third dimension to this that I would describe is sort of call it a discovery framework, right? And this idea of having a discovery framework is a way for you to take those situations and sort of contextualize them. Because what's the difference between a customer coming to you and saying, "Hey, I want to share with you the details about how we're doing things today, because I think that there's some opportunities for improvement," right? So we're looking at sort of the current state, versus a customer that comes to you, or a prospect that comes to you and says, "Hey, Tim, we need a quote on XYZ because we've defined our requirements, and this is what we need." So you're now, as a sales rep, you're like, "Okay, hang on a second. I'm not quite sure how to handle, or compare and contrast these two situations." So to me, making sure that you have an idea around sort of what does a discovery framework look like? Because, your process and your qualification, have to relate to that. So, a really simple one would be like, if let's just take the scenario where a customer comes to you and says, "Hey, Tim, I've got these requirements." And you can say, "Okay, well, that's exciting. You've defined those. Could you describe to me, if you don't mind, what is it that you're hoping to accomplish, through this acquisition, right? And if you wouldn't mind describing for me, like, what's the end state that you're hoping to achieve? And then if you don't mind, if we could sort of work backwards and describe to me, how do you do it today, right? So current state, consequences, negative consequences, desired state, positive outcomes that you're hoping to achieve, ultimately leads to your requirements. Like, what are your actual requirements, and how did you arrive at those requirements? So again, to me, MEDDICC and the process should really map to this idea. But I think, to me, having a good idea of what a discovery framework would look like is something that I think any customer would actually appreciate, right? For one of the things that I've found is that salespeople have to be leaders. Great salespeople are leaders. Okay. And when you're a leader, what that means is that people will follow you. And that includes the prospect and the customer. And so demonstrating a command of the process, and an ability to, lead and guide, to ultimately achieving a great result for everybody involved, and to make sure that you're using everybody's time wisely. I think people respect that, and they will agree, they'll agree to follow your process unless they've got a better one in mind. So I think, maybe the short answer to your question is making sure that in addition to having a really solid, mapping of stages and a really good framework for qualification, that you definitely need to make sure that you have a really solid and well-adopted discovery framework.
Okay, that's what I thought I heard you say. So thank you for that recap. Solid stages, because you got to administer the process. Qualification methodology, because you only want to be working on legitimate good deals.
That's right.
And then a discovery framework to make sure you're situationally fluent with where the customer's at when you bring the buyer into the equation. So that feels like a third piece that managers need to be aware of and manage to. Process, qualification, discovery. Have you got an acronym yet for the discovery? Have you? Are you now the father of something we should announce here today? Like, this is the big reveal.
Yeah, that's right.
And right. Tim, you can be deemed stepfather, since you're the one that.
Because I just spotted that it's coming. It's happening.
Exactly.
I think let's just watch it right now. Let's just see it happen.
I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay out of the family. So I'm just going to be a second cousin over here.
Join hundreds of B2B revenue leaders at Emblazers Revenue Summit 2025, powered by Corporate Visions in Denver, April 15th through 17th. Connect with top CROs, gain exclusive insights, and get buyer-centric playbooks from experts and peers. Reignite your sales leadership with evidence-based approaches you can start using the next day. Will we see you at the Ultimate Conference for Revenue Leaders? Visit cbi.to/summit to secure your spot at Emblazers Revenue Summit 2025.
Dick, do you everything you said made sense, and everything we said about why packaging and acronyms, I'm not trying to have you invent one here, but like those things that you said about discovery really resonate, and the ability to know when you enter where they're at and being able to adapt to that. How do you teach that today? What's kind of the again, even if it's sort of if it's a rough outline, I guess we heard some of it, but I'd love to hear where you think it's going.
I'll share with you a really quick description, because again, I always strive to have the simplest possible solution. And to me, the simplest possible solution is actually an X box. So upper left corner is current state. Okay, tell me about how you're doing things today. And what are the consequences of the current what's the current undesirable state, and what are the consequences of that? That's upper left corner. Mm-hmm. Upper right is how would you like things to be, and what are the good things that you'd like to see happen as a result, right? So some people refer to that as the positive outcomes. Lower left is required capabilities. So now if the question is, okay, so we know where you are today and we know where you want to try to get to. So the question is, how do you get from there to there? And the answer is capabilities. What are the capabilities that you need in order to get to this future desired state? And in the lower right corner is, where have you done it before? Right. So this sounds awesome. But can you share with me an example of where you've done this before? Because obviously we want to work with people that have a track record of success. So that is a picture that you can draw on the whiteboard with your prospect. Again, this is a great example for salespeople to lead, right? So if you're in person, it's really fun. It's fun to think about, that as a company, like we have a major push now for our salespeople to get out and get in front of and get face to face with our customers again. Because obviously we've been through a lot, these last years. And so getting out there and getting face time and getting on the whiteboard, and putting an X on the board that describes, what's happening now, how would you like things to be? What are the critical capabilities, and where have we done this before? If you can lay that out in collaboration with it's a great champion development exercise, right? You do that with your champion. Now all of a sudden you're arming them with the ability to tell the story of why Cloudera, right? Why do we need to work with these guys, and why are they different and better than the alternative solutions? And so I think to me it's a really simple, straightforward way to approach it. Engage your audience, the power of the pen, and doing something interactively with your customers is really a great way to build relationships.
So many things in that answer brought tears to my eyes, especially the whiteboard. But also a great 2x2 is life. There's you can have your Venn diagram. I'll take a 2x2 every day. And what I really like about that is that process and qualification are sort of necessary things for us as companies to have some semblance of control over our pipeline and the ability to manage that and have a common nomenclature, et cetera. But discovery is really for the customer as well. That's what I love. That's what I heard there is like, that's a moment that should be valuable to the customer, not a checkbox and a question list for the rep to cover off on, but really something that together you and the customer do, and that plots your path forward. So leaders, managers, process, qualification, discovery, 3 separate moves, and discovery becomes when it's now about the buyer and the rep begins to engage that process. I love it. So thank you for delineating those. And I think you gave us a very simple out of the box framework, which you and I will work on an acronym, and we'll see if we get royalties.
I want to go back, maybe if you don't mind, I'd like to go back for a minute to something that Amanda asked earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, where do opportunities come from, and how do they originate? Because sometimes, we're outbound and we're trying to generate interest and we're trying to crack into a target account, right? And in this situation, we're looking for pain. We're trying to quantify how we could potentially solve that pain. We're looking for examples of where we've done it before. But there's other situations where it's like you get an RFP and you're like, okay, well, so the point is that, and I've always thought of this as sort of like the hand that you're dealt, right? It's like every opportunity is sort of it's like a game of poker. I've been dealt this hand. And so if I get an RFP from a company that I've been working with, that I've been educating, and all of a sudden I look at the RFP and it's really well written and it seems to be favorable for us, it's like all of a sudden I've got decision criteria, right? Ding, 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 right? Do I know who the economic buyer is? Do I have a champion, right? So other times, there's opportunities that come from situations where we had a champion and the champion left and they went to a new company and they called us and they said, hey, Tim, guess what? I'm over at this new company and we've got a lot of the same problems that we've been experiencing, that you helped us solve at our previous company. Can you come in here? Right. So now I've got a champion and, we're looking to solve problems. So again, using this as a way to sort of assess kind of where you are and what are your gaps and what's your starting point, again, is a great way for you to sort of set your strategy going forward. And I think, maybe to Amanda's point, or actually, Tim, I think you mentioned it, just talking about kind of the customer's process, right? How do we align that to the customer's process? Sometimes we get to sort of dictate because we're the initiators, but lots of times, sort of it's being initiated by the customer, and now we're in a formal process. So again, we've got to sort of align those things.
Alignment's so key. We do have research that says essentially this, that the highest performing, most successful reps have what can be called problem statement alignment with their customers. And the higher degree of problem statement alignment, the more propensity for a win in your favor. And what I just heard again corroborates that if you can drive the experience where together you're working on that whiteboard to define the problem statement and directionally then the solution to solve it, that's going to bend in your favor every time.
For sure. And if I can just maybe add one little thing to that, Tim, it would be that, you know, it's so critical. People's time is so valuable anymore, right? And people are it's hard to get a meeting, right? And so if you're going to get a meeting with influential people, you better have something interesting to say. And so, if you're going to be interesting, you better do your homework and you better know what the strategic priorities are of that business. And if you can work backwards, right, those are the desired outcomes. You better know what those are, and you need to work backwards to sort of figure out, okay, help me understand the situation that you're in and how we can potentially impact that to help you achieve the strategic outcomes that your business cares about, right? People aren't, if you don't have a story to tell they're not going to waste their time. And so, obviously making sure that you do your homework and understanding what those priorities are is critical.
I love it. You're not just a theoretical acronym builder. You are practical and experiencing it every day. And that's the wisdom that I think our listeners are getting is if you're a frontline manager leader, these are absolutely things you can start doing different and better tomorrow.
Yeah,
for sure.
Dick, thank you so much for your perspective. Tim, it's always good to see you. Wizard of sales psychology.
Well,
Michael Jordan of
I
revenue
wanted to
growth.
get Dick on this podcast, so I'm good now. We just,
You're good.
Check. We
Yeah.
did it.
Great to see you guys.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Dick.
Thanks so much for being here. Well, Tim, we just talked to the biological father of MEDDICC, Dick Dunkel. That's his term. That's what he coined himself. So father of MEDDICC. A lot of interesting insights that I had never known came out of that conversation. I'm curious, what did you get out of the chat with him?
Yeah, well, what I appreciate is MEDDICC, the qualification technique. It's been around like 30 years. He's like it's now a full-grown child for him that MEDDICC's been around. But what I really appreciate about the conversation is that MEDDICC goes under the bucket of qualification, like making sure it's a real deal and it's a good deal. But when he dove into the area of discovery and created a delineation between qualification and discovery, and that discovery, and then he gave us a cool framework, is what really drives the conversation with the modern buyer and really makes this valuable to the buyer, not just to the seller side. I love everything we talked about related to discovery, and I think our leader manager audience should really take that with them, that once process and qualification is in place, it's really discovery that makes the difference.
Yeah, agreed. And that it's simple. He couldn't stress enough. It was a simple methodology and it's successful if you follow it the way it's intended to be.